So 20 years ago, we worked together on a show, and in which it was the first time your photographs were exhibited. You had done photo books before, but you had never exhibited photographs, and not along paintings or other works. And that's where the idea of this show originated. Can you maybe explain a bit the link between that time and now?
I was pretty new to photography at that point. I'd been painting a long time, but photographs had always been there, that like they would be for any artist, I think. But they started to become more and more part of my work, and that was the first time I showed photographs. And Anne suggested a few years ago that we revisit that idea, and it's been really interesting because, as you can see in the show, I've done a lot of photography, especially recently in the past few years. I think most of the show is from the past 5 years. So the photographs and the photo books are kind of the basis for the show, or the ground zero of the show. There are connections between the photo books and the inkjet books. The inkjet books, they are documentations of works on paper I've been making for the past also 4 or 5 years. And we've got paintings here. So there are different elements that relate to each other, but I hope create some kind of bigger package.
Yes, I feel on my side, the desire to do a show again was to use, in a way, the fact that the work has also followed your move to Texas and to Marfa, and that this change of situation has created also a change in the work. Because the first show 20 years ago was about showing that your relationship to the city, your relationship to the energy of your time was perceivable in the paintings. And I think it's interesting that now the energy and landscape of Texas is perceivable in the work today.
I hadn't thought about it so much, but I've been spending time. My wife and I bought a house 15 years ago in Marfa, and the next photo book, surprise, surprise, had to do with Texas subject matter. So
that's West Texas psychosculpture.
Yes. Yes. Okay, so I've left out sculpture from the list of things in the show. Sculpture is another important element, and in a way, maybe the sculpture is as new now as photography was then. When I got to Marfa, I had a sense that the landscape invited sculpture. I started thinking about sculpture, and for me, thinking about it at that moment was taking photographs of things. Marfa was more, but still is very rich in junk. You know, it's a very poor town. People's homes are, you don't have walls or fences. You can see a lot if you walk around town. I started taking pictures of things that amused me as sculpture, or interested me in sculpture, or I thought stretched the idea of sculpture. And after I did the photo book, I actually started working with fencing wire. It imitated my drawing line very closely. So I started collecting that, and now after 8-10 years, I've figured out ways to make larger cast sculpture.
And I think here comes a link between the sculpture and the paintings for me. You use things to complexify the reading of the sculpture by leaving a lot of traces of how they are made, the process. And in the paintings that we're exhibiting with monotypes, you have a little bit the same relationship.
It's true, the technical process to make the sculptures is very similar to the way I've been creating images in silkscreen. When we're putting the sculptures together at the foundry, I have them leave as much of the signs of it being put together, so all the welds are shown. So it gives you some entry into how the thing was made. The same kind of low-level painterliness I can work with in the silkscreen, very, very similar to the way sculptures are fabricated.
And I think beyond, the description of the process that it's possible with this exhibition to enter very precisely into how you make things. But as we discussed, going too far that direction might also prevent the appreciation of the work and the relationship to the work that we try to keep.
Talking about the process and explaining how things are made is a slippery slope. That's not what the work's about. But maybe it's interesting to show it in a show like this to give people more access to the work. But it is not the point of the show. It's not a didactic exercise.
No, but I think to understand that you introduce a distance between the hand and the final work, that is an interesting thing because I think it's very central to your work.
Yes, but an important part of that is that there is still hand. I think,
yes, exactly.
I'm closer to the hand side than the fabric, completely fabricated
But they've
side.
managed to keep the hand without linking it to psychology or expression of the self. Yesterday you were talking about when you started to paint, saying, I don't know what you say, but basically that you couldn't do anything or that you were not even talented. So you said something like that. And then we were comparing the punk music bands who were all kind of unskilled musicians producing incredibly energetic and the music right for their times. And
I mean, they even embraced their lack of skill. I grew up in Chicago at an incredibly interesting time in Chicago. In the 60s, I moved to New York at the absolute perfect moment in the mid-70s when the whole downtown thing exploded. So I've been lucky. I was rejected at every art school I ever applied to. So, except one. So I didn't have these kind of school experiences, but I was living in these incredibly important times. Chicago in the 60s was wild, and New York in the 70s was really wild. So I think I learned a lot just from my artistic environment.
I mean, I think that your work has a capacity to capture something from where it's made, when it's made, and this capacity to capture the time, I think, is a great strength of your work and what makes it very actual. And by showing how you captured the space where you now live, which is different.
This is true, but also I'm unaware of it. I didn't go to Texas looking to see how it was going to affect my work.
No.
We met when I was on fellowship in Rome, but people would immediately ask me, how has it affected your work? I'd go back to New York, and as if I would start using sienna and try to imitate the light of Rome or something. Ultimately, I realized it was only my second time in Italy, and I became really fascinated with Roman Baroque architecture, and that really influenced me. The geometry of the Baroque became a big influence, but I didn't think of it as being Italy.
That's what I mean by not being conceptual. It's letting things come in and letting them come out without wanting to, without
certainly not thinking
deliberate
about it.
Intention.
Yeah. And I guess the same with Marfa, just this idea of seeing the open spaces and thinking about sculpture, it influenced my work. It didn't mean I started making horizontal paintings.
No, but I think it makes you an artist that were already outside of modernism. The fact to let context comes in is already a gesture for me closer to the time we're living in than where it originated.
That's an interesting point. Modernism was so universal. I think, again, in retrospect, I was lucky with timing. I started out as a young artist in the 70s, pretty much where we would peg the end of modernism, I think.
Totally,
somewhere
totally.
in that period. I was able to not have to deal with the heavy weight of trying to deal with modernism and the end of the modernism.
I think some artists of your generation reacted by simply deconstructing modernism or reacting, but you were already somewhere else.
I was just a little younger, so someone, Sherry Levine's paintings were important at the time, but that's not how I was going to deal with.
Yeah, I feel that you were already starting a new conversation without having decided it, but just by doing what you were doing.
And those guys were killing modernism. I didn't have to deal with it anymore, yeah.
Okay.